I decided I'd take a couple minutes today to produce a short video on my recently completed hydroplane. Now, recently completed, by recently completed I mean a recently rebuilt hydroplane. This is a Hal Kelly Wetback 3-point hydroplane, a 1954 design, and a friend of mine and I, Willem Greneveld, otherwise known as Billy G, bought this boat as a Clark Craft kit when we were living in Thompson, Manitoba. We were both apartment dwellers at the time. We had our own apartments. And so when the kit arrived, we sort of divvied it up and construction began in our apartments. Later we moved it to a friend's garage, and that's where it was completed in the summer of 1984, and we ran it in 84. It was originally powered by a 25 horsepower Mercury spinning stainless steel chopper propeller. According to Billy, I don't recall, but according to Billy, we actually got 47 miles per hour out of it. And like I say, I don't recall, but we got it going fast enough to scare ourselves, that's for sure. In 1984, what was quite popular were the Formula One race cars, the John Player Specials. And they had a very attractive black paint job with gold trim. So this boat was originally painted black. We never got around to adding the gold trim to it, but we ran it in 1984. I left Thompson in 1985, pretty much forgot about the boat. I happened to catch up with Billy in 2019. We started talking about the boat, and apparently it still existed, although it was sitting derelict in a barn somewhere in southern Ontario. He asked me if I'd be interested in taking the boat. I thought about it for a day and thought, what the heck? So shortly thereafter, Billy delivered the boat, and I got to tell you, it was in pretty sad shape. It was beyond economical repair. The mice found it as quite a comfortable place to live, as did various other forms of wildlife, and it was filled with leaves, and it was a mess. There was a lot of rot. A man brighter than I would have just said, it's firewood. But for me, it presented a bit of a challenge. How often do you get a chance to have another go at a project that you had originally built 30 odd years before? So here it is, and in the rebuild of it, my priority was actually simply to make it look pretty. And I didn't care if it would float. I didn't care if it would run. All I wanted to do was to make it look pretty. And so here is the result of that labor. We'll just do a little bit of a walk around on it. And maybe before I go too far, from this angle, when you have a look at that bow, on a Hal Kelly Wetback, that bow is actually covered in aircraft fabric, Seconite. And between the bow and the side decks, there's about a 1/4 of an inch gap. And to me, that was ugly. So my objective was to make this thing look pretty. A previous project had been to build 3 cedar strip canoes, and I had cedar strips left over. So I decided I would cedar strip the bow. As well, with normal Hal Kelly Wetbacks, they have a bit of a shovel nose appearance on their bow, which I thought looked ugly. So I took the time to change the shape to give us more of a perfect ellipse. And I like it a lot better. Ahead of the steering wheel is a hatch. Under that hatch is the fuel tank. And the hatch also got the cedar strip treatment. If you have a look at, let's call it the chine here, you're going to see these. And a normal wetback has no means of securing the boat to a dock. And so what I did was I added a number of those hard points. There's one in the bow, there's a couple of them there. And that way when you approach a dock, you can just simply drop a rope through those and secure the boat to the dock that way. There's a couple more on the transom. They are stainless that I used there. There's a bit of a look at the motor. The steering bar, I MacGyvered out of wood. Wood's kind of my specialty. That's the original steering wheel. We used that steering wheel in 1984, and it's still good. And when you have a look at the side of the motor, when you have a look at the throttle, all of that stuff I MacGyvered. The only thing not MacGyvered, you can see there's red Bowden cable there, and I didn't MacGyver that. On the back of the motor, you may be able to see a hose coming out of the back of the motor. And these Johnsons, this is in 1974, these Johnsons have an above water and a below water exhaust. And so the above water exhaust is primarily for starting and so on. And the below water exhaust is used when the motor is underway, when it's running. I needed a means of ensuring that I was going to get adequate cooling for that motor, lest I should cook it. So I just simply hooked up a plastic tube that runs forward, and you can see it dumps over the side. So as I'm running along, as long as I can see water coming out of that tube, I know my motor is getting adequate cooling. I'm going to try and take a quick look at what we did for throttle linkage. And as you can see, it's all MacGyvered. Works great. You can see some plumbing coming out of the front of the engine. This was originally an E model. It originally had an electric start on it. And I took the electric start, the electric choke, solenoid, anything electric. I took off the motor and saved myself about 10 pounds in weight. Down below you can see a modern requirement, the fire extinguisher. That's where it's stowed. And on the side you can see the safety kit, again another modern requirement. It's on a bungee cord, so if I require it, I just grab onto it, pull it into the cockpit there and detach the bungee cord, and I'm good to go. By nature, I try to get by on the cheap. I try to MacGyver everything, and here's my version of a kill switch. So this can be attached to my life jacket with a little clip, which is what happens. But what it is it's just simply one of those key passes from a hotel that I forgot to hand in. So to shut down the motor, I need to ground out the ignition. And you can see that there's two leads there, separated by the key pass. If I come flying out of the boat, this is going to go with me. We're going to make contact. There's your path to ground. Engine shuts down. Works great. How much does it cost me? I don't know. Nothing. And that's the way I roll. Ahead of that is a tiny tack. And with the tiny tacks, when you buy those are cheap. And they have an integral battery. When the battery goes flat, you replace the tack. I got the plumbing running to the back with quick disconnect on it. The people that build the tiny tack say, don't try to extend the leads. Well, for me, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. So I extended the leads. It works great. The Johnson motor should turn up between 5,000 and 6,000 RPM. I'm a pretty heavy guy, and when I get in there and get this thing running flat out, it does about 5,300 RPM, which I figure is okay fine. The throttle, you could buy a throttle. We had a big old clunky Chrysler throttle in this thing originally, and so I simply MacGyvered one just using bar stock and stuff that I had on hand, and it works great. Once again, we're back at the hatch. And when you lift up the hatch, there's the fuel tank. And we can store a few things in there. And like you can see that those are all just cedar strips under there. And that hatch works fine. So there it is, Billy G. We've had it out, we've run it. We're having a lot of fun with it. It'll never go real fast because of that Johnson motor and the gear ratio in the bottom end, and your limited choice on propellers. So there are better motors suited to this task, but I got this one dirt cheap. And again, I did say that I'm kind of frugal, cheap, and so I bought that motor and said, you know something, that'll get us going. And it does quite well. It starts first try every time, runs nice and smoothly, does everything I needed to do. And as far as the wetback design, very responsive, very stable. It works great. It works great. So where to from here with this boat? No idea. But it was a rare opportunity to connect with a boat that I originally built 36 years before. And so we simply gave her a rebuild. Not sure if I mentioned the Clarkcraft people say with their kits to build a boat like this takes about 70 hours. And for me to rebuild this boat, I spent about 300 hours rebuilding it. So from the get-go, it did not make much sense to do this. So I just had to get right after it. There it is. I'm pleased.